A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 67. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my feisty co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
I'm here and I'm ready to go.
Are you feisty?
I'm ready to do it.
We got a lot.
I have opinions. I have news and views.
I know, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. It's like we are T-minus 2 weeks or fortnight, as one of the EU-based Star Wars Twitters was saying before we went on the air.
Yeah. That's the European Union, not the expanded universe.
Yes, yeah, they wiped out that.
Yeah.
Actually, first and foremost, I haven't even asked you. Did you get a ticket?
I did. I got tickets. We got tickets. My wife and I. We're gonna go. Although I'll be out of town for about a week, right when the movie comes out, as it turns out, and so I'll be seeing it on, I think, the 26th. I think.
Again, you're going to be seeing it late.
Yeah. Well, I have family that lives out of town. I usually go visit them for Christmas, and my wife is not necessarily up for seeing a Star Wars movie on our vacation, and so,
so she's like, oh, that's just too stressful.
I'm like, yeah, this is fine. Well, I can wait a couple extra days, but I did. I'm going to go see it at the Alamo Draft House.
Nice.
Here in Austin, Texas, and they have these souvenir pint glasses that you can buy with your ticket. And so I did that. So I'm gonna get one of these souvenir glasses with it.
Oh, nice.
So I was like, well, I'm not gonna see this right when it comes out, but in placement of that, sort of to make up for that, I'll get myself a little something.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess we're kind of we kind of were in a similar position in the fact that I had I very much make an effort to try to see it the first day, but only because I just, at that point, my anticipation is so high. A week is actually of commercials would drive me personally nuts. But I had this issue where I bought tickets to some event on Friday the 16th, thinking like, oh, the 16th, what day is that? And not even thinking that, oh, that's when the movie comes out. So I was kind of like, oh, great. Do I, get rid of my tickets and then I just go see Star Wars? But luckily, that I went, and when tickets came available, when Fandango, I think it was Fandango. Yes, when Fandango was actually working, I was able to procure tickets on the 15th. So I'm seeing it at 7:00 on that Thursday.
Ah,
so
excellent.
I will be like, some people, I don't know, when does it come out in the UK? Do new movies come out? Because everybody talks about how the UK gets it a couple days early, but
I feel like I saw something saying it was coming out on the 14th.
Yeah, so they get it a day early, and then I think that's it. I think they get their new releases are like generally on Thursday, and then since they're doing these early screenings, it's an extra day. I don't quite understand how they do that, because if they're showing the movie on the 15th, doesn't it technically open on the 15th?
Well, so here we go. It looks like parts of Europe, but not all of them. So the movie will open on the 14th at the Dubai Film Festival, and then also in Belgium, Denmark, Finland, France, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and Taiwan. And then on the 15th in Argentina, Austria, Czech Republic, Germany, Spain, the UK, Greece, Hong Kong, Croatia, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, and some other European countries, and most of the Western Hemisphere. And then on the 16th, here in the US, Canada, Estonia, India, Japan, Lithuania, New Zealand, Turkey, Venezuela, and China will get it on January 12th. So basically there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there are 10 countries in which this movie will open on the 16th, one of them being the US. So most of the world will have seen this movie before Americans will.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny when you talk about how, Star Wars is such like an American franchise, and how they're working to make inroads in some Asian countries. I mean, most of the world gets this before we do in the US. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like a foregone conclusion. It's like, oh, we don't need to. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the philosophy is behind that. Maybe it's just because things come out on different days, or that's the way they time it, or right. I don't know. They need to have it closer to Christmas in the U.S. because they know so many people. I don't know. It's kind of like, oh, if we put it out too far after Christmas, people will, won't be as apt to go see it on Christmas Day. Or, I mean, it's honestly, I don't know how companies plan these things out. It's kind of interesting. I mean, you and I have talked a bit about this kind of spoilerish thing, and I almost feel like, at least me personally, I use the term spoiler kind of interchangeably, when I just mean like plot of the story, things about the movie, where it's kind of this amorphous thing in the middle where it's not. I don't really think there's going to be some huge revelations that are going to kind of, reorientate. Like if, Force Awakens, if I had found out 2 weeks ahead of time that, Kylo Ren was Han Solo and Leia's son, then I would have considered that a big spoiler. But, the fact that whether or not Tarkin is in this, or, both you and I have decided not to watch that clip that's going around that Felicity Jones shows on
the Tonight Show.
Yeah, on the Tonight Show. And I mean, I call that a spoiler in kind of a loose term in the spoiler. I don't want to spoil the experience.
Right.
I mean, we've already kind of, spoiled it as much. We've talked about it. We speculate. We've read a prequel novel last week. If you haven't heard that, I would definitely check that episode out where we talk about Catalyst. So, I mean, spoiler in the fact that we're not just breaking down the plot. I kind of think of spoilers as like, I don't want to experience Star Wars in weird, unconnected chunks. And
like bits and pieces. And the clip that Felicity Jones, I guess, brought with her to the Tonight Show that they showed, at least on Twitter, at least on when I was looking at the Twitter feed, it was kind of being passed around as, oh, this is our first listen at Michael Giacchino's score for the movie. And I don't want that. Like, I kind of want, this being Star Wars, I want to go into it with fresh ears, I guess instead of fresh eyes. I want to have like the complete experience of the movie plus the score. And like you said, not just like, well, here's a few seconds of the score in this isolated scene that you're not really sure how it connects to everything. And that's how I want to experience it. So I, like you, I'm not going to watch that clip. But I mean, there's this larger point too. And you and I were chatting about this a little briefly before the show. That was when I started getting feisty. But it feels like with both The Force Awakens and now with Rogue One a little bit, there's this push. I don't know if it's a demand for this and that people are like actively asking the filmmakers about this, or if this is part of Disney Lucasfilm's marketing strategy for these things of like, oh, well, here's what the first 10 minutes of the film are like, or here's the first word that Luke Skywalker says in the movie, or here's are we going to have an opening crawl or not? Let's get a definitive answer. And particularly since we're 2 weeks away from the thing being released, like we can wait 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone can wait 2 weeks, that we don't need to know what the first 10 minutes of the movie are going to be like right now. Like we'll learn that pretty quickly. So I don't, like I said, I don't know if this is demand, in which case, just stop it. Or if this is, Disney Lucasfilm, like if this is the way that they're kind of marketing these movies now and managing kind of the promotional push for this stuff is a way to kind of generate new headlines every couple of days for it. Is like, oh, well, we'll just release little bits and pieces that will then become headlines. People will like click on it or read it. Like, oh, now I know what Luke Skywalker's first word is. And in which case, I think they also they need to cut it out. Although, if that is a conscious choice on their part too, I don't know if that's just kind of the reality of how you market a movie like that these days. If that's driven more by kind of like a real shift in strategy or their desire to kind of set the tone and be kind of a leader, be out at the forefront of changing how these kinds of movies are marketed, or if this is a reaction to, well, we have this social media environment and things move very quickly. So this is really the only way that we can kind of stay on top of this and keep this movie in the public consciousness for the next 2 weeks to make sure that people keep buying tickets.
Yeah, it's kind of, and I've already heard that, aside from Fandango having some server issues early on, but I think there's some explanation as to why. But the ticket sales are pretty much at 90% of what the Force Awakens pre-sales were about. So, I mean, that's, if they had anxiety about, what consumer educating the consumer about what this movie is, it's, they're probably not going to have to worry. But, as far as the way movies are marketed now, and at first I was going to say, oh, this is kind of like a millennial thing, but it's really not, because I was thinking about, even anecdotally, when I hear about how people consume movies now, it's like they consume, like they'll get a movie and then like, oh, I watched 20 minutes of it. I watched an hour of it. I'm going to finish it up tomorrow. It's like, I think, at least for other people, it's like way more common to consume films in pieces, which I think is kind of bad, but it seems like, say in like Mexico, they showed, was to press, of course, which they showed like the first half hour in Mexico because they did all the press in Mexico last week. And it's like, well, why would you, why are you showing a movie only a half an hour's worth of it to people? If it's good, the best possible scenario is that you're going to love it and then you're going to be disappointed because you're like, I'm all excited and I only saw the first half hour. I want to see the other 90 minutes of this thing. But I mean, I guess maybe it's just the way I consume stuff. It's like, I don't want to know that much. Although, I mean, having a show that we do news, it's like I consume a lot more tidbits of Star Wars generally. I mean, I was almost even thinking about in the future, like, the main saga films, I definitely want to kind of keep the show the way we do it and not spoiling it. But I'm like, if we're still around doing when the Han Solo movie is thing, I'm kind of thinking we should almost do an experiment where we just spoil all of it for ourselves and then kind of do a comparison contrast when it comes out. You know what I mean? Oh, you're not there.
No, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
Like, how did our enjoyment of the movie?
I don't know. I mean, just
be
like
affected by knowing so much.
Well, like if the idea, if oh boy, and I'm going into the back into the prequel era. There was like a guy. I think he was like a Jesuit priest or something, where he created like they call them like the virtual prequels. And
right.
he took like Photoshop and all these, every like image, and created like from every rumor what he thought the movie was going to be. And he would orientate them as time. And then like you could kind of compare them afterwards and like they would be so different than what he thought that they were going to be. It was kind of shocking. And it's like, I'm not saying that we would ever do something like that, but I almost think it would be interesting to for people that aren't super heavy into spoilers, just go nuts and read every rumor about, like, say, like something that we are kind of on the fence about, like, say, the Han Solo movie. At least I feel like we've all said that. It's like, if it turns out to be great, but if it turns out to be kind of wonky, then, I don't think we're going to be like angry about it. We'll just be like, well, that didn't work. So I feel like we'd lose less from having spoil something like that, a standalone movie, than say, like, finding out every little tidbit about episode 8, and kind of having it ruined for us. I don't know. It's just something I want you to put in the back of your head, because we've got plenty of time to jump on the Han Solo spoiler bandwagon. But it's like, I guess my point is that, like, if people are much more comfortable with that, maybe I'd like to try it and see if how it works for me, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I don't know. And the Han Solo one is interesting too, because we're still far enough out from it that I'm kind of like, I don't know that I really care that much about what the story is or how much I know about it. I think previously I've talked about Rogue One that way, where I was like, yeah, Rogue One, I have pretty low expectations, or I have zero expectations for it. And now that we are like right up to the release date, I'm like, I don't want to hear anything else. I want this to be good and I want to enjoy it, so
right.
Yeah, it would definitely be an exercise in kind of like whatever the opposite of self-restraint is.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
guess it's in self gluttony, I guess, or gluttony.
Yeah, well, I mean,
because at this point with the Han Solo story, I'm kind of like, how Han and Chewie ended up, where they were at the very beginning, how they ended up in the Tatooine, the Mos Eisley Cantina. Yeah, fine. And young Lando, sure. I want to see young Lando, but at this point, I'm trying not to have too much invested in it, because I don't want to, right. Like, I don't want to get too invested in it. I don't want my love of that character to be affected too much. Like, I don't want to be one of those people who's like, this movie ruined everything about what I love about Lando. I don't want to be one of those people. So I have this kind of blasé attitude, at least right now, about the Han Solo movie, of like, yeah, whatever they do, it's fine. I'm not really, it's not going to affect me in any way. But yeah, if I were to start reading more about it and learning more about it, I wonder if I'll be able to handle it.
Oh, okay, yeah, that is a good point. I'm stealing this from somebody else's. I want to say. I try to give credit and credit's due. I think it's the Sandcrawler podcast, which is kind of it's a collector's podcast that I listen to. And I think they were talking a bit about Billy D at a convention, and somebody asked him about Donald Glover. And now I'm paraphrasing, so don't consider this new, like, hard news, people. This is like what they call fake news. He was basically, what do you think about Donald Glover? And he's like, there's only one Lando. And it's just kind of like, he just kind of left it at that. It's kind of like, it's kind of like, now, I mean, Billy D is Billy D.
Right.
And you can't be like, it's like asking Sean Connery. It's like, what do you think about, Pierce Brosnan? It's like, quit asking, it's like, I did that. I set the die. I set the die for this a long time ago. Everything is, I've played Lando, I'm probably second only to Anthony Daniels in his amount of, ancillary appearances as Lando. He even would go for the video games. Billy D actually, no, he didn't make it to the Empire. I mean, the Return of the Jedi radio drama. He only for the Empire one, but not for Return of the Jedi. I think it was actually played. Did you ever hear that one? It was like
The Return of the Jedi?
Yeah.
I must have, but it's been a long time.
You know who plays Lando? Ari Gross.
That's right.
Ari Gross. Right. For people who, like, I'm trying to think, it's like, Ari Gross, like, he's a character actor. I'm not picking on the guy. But he, you might remember him in that first scene of Minority Report. He's the bereaved husband who, in a crime of passion, decides to try to murder his wife because she catches him her cheating on him. And he also was Ellen DeGeneres' best friend on like the first, like her when she had the sitcom. She was like
the one where she had a bookstore.
Yeah,
right?
When it was called These Friends of Mine before she kind of became the star of the show. So
Right.
I don't know why. If you need your Ari Gross news, come to Talking Bird, the special edition. The Ari Gross.
He shows up on various TV shows playing, a one-off character.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm way off in the weeds on this. There you do run the risk of through, like even with the prequels, I was very good about just avoiding spoilers. And I feel like I got a lot out of these movies. And I feel like it's not that, you'll never get, as people speculate, you'll never get another, no, I am your father kind of thing. Because even the reveal of Kylo Ren, to me, was kind of like, yeah, I kind of knew. I mean, Laura said,
well, the movie kind of the movie foreshadowed it, like so heavily that when it happened, you're like, oh yeah, right, of course,
yeah.
And so, yeah, it was the movie. The movie didn't do a good, in Empire, it basically comes out of nowhere,
right?
And that is not J.J. Abrams' style, I guess.
Yeah, that is true. But yeah, I mean, it's like I said, that's not when I talk about spoilers. It's like I'm even kind of avoiding. I'm even avoiding the interviews now, even though I really enjoyed, the little. I kind of liked it more, like say their celebration thing where everybody's kind of like, except for Zhen Wang. Is it Wang? The guy who plays Baze Malbus.
Should be.
I'm terrible with these pronunciations. When he like kind of dropped a spoiler out of the air, but aside from that, everybody was kind of like, oh, I'm a pilot, I'm a this, I'm a that, and it's all very coy. And I kind of like that because I just feel like even Ben Mendelsohn, he's like, I'm Australian, kind of sexy or whatever. I'm a bad guy. I kind of like that. And so now when, like, I don't watch Fallon anyway, so I won't be watching that. And I think it actually was last night, but, you could spend all day watching clips and, I think, Gareth Edwards is now, he's on talking about, about, that's where that stuff comes from. Like, oh, what's the first scene? What's the first this?
Right.
What's the first that? It's like, but like I said, you can enjoy it however you want, but I guess anticipation or well, not anticipation, but God, what's even the word? Like secrecy. I guess that's just not, I guess that's just really not valued the way it used to be. Maybe I just have an older way of thinking about it. I mean, it's like, it's obviously working. If they're at 90%, when everybody's worried, like, oh, where's the Bothans in this movie? Or is this going to have Rey in it? All these kind of things that really are honestly, I feel maybe have come from Star Wars nerds. You know what I mean? It's like they're kind of creating this idea that maybe people won't understand when generally viewers are like, oh, it's a Star Wars movie. And then in 5 minutes, they'll figure out like, oh, it's the well, okay. I'll ask these questions after I watch it. Because I doubt they made a movie that people are going to have to be like, intimately acquainted with the prequels or even intimately acquainted with, the original trilogy. I mean, somebody kind of jokingly says, oh, the opening crawl for episode 4 is a spoiler for Rogue One or whatever, it's that kind of idea. I mean, you can laugh about that and stuff, but
yeah, I
mean, not that it's a spoiler, but the fact is, 20 years from now, it'll all just be kind of considered one big, run of movies. It's not going to be, it's not going to be a situation where people are going to be worried about, spoilers.
You'll have to get your knife, what was it? Sequence.
Oh, yeah. Machete order.
The machete order. That's what it was. I knew it was something.
Machete order. It's that, for people who aren't super into it, you can look it up, but it's basically what you do is you watch, you watch the original trilogy. How does it? Yeah. So
I thought it was like you watch. Instead of watching them in number order, you watch like 1, 2, and then like 4, 5,
No, you
3, and 6 or something.
no.
like that.
Okay, well now here's how
Here,
how
let me
I've
check this
come. This is how I've come to understand machete order. So I could be wrong because I'm not going to look it up. So basically, you watch episode 4, A New Hope, then you watch episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. Big revelation.
That's what it is, yeah.
I am your father. No, it's not true. Jump out the thing, saved. Then you stop, go back, and either you can avoid watching. You can avoid
episode 1.
Yeah, you don't even have to watch it because it doesn't inform. Then you watch episode 2, 3, and then 6.
Yeah, that's what it is. Right?
Because it kind of amps. Supposedly, they say dramatically it amps up the redemption of Anakin Skywalker. I mean, it's
and it's also like, you get the "I am your father" moment, and then here's a flashback. Essentially, here's like a 5-hour long flashback. Of how he got to that point. And then you get Return of the Jedi.
I mean, I find it interesting. I have done it before, but you can't put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak. I mean, I know all this stuff. I can kind of sometimes take a step back and look at it. There's always then been that cut of the Godfather, first 2 Godfather movies they're put together. I guess originally Coppola, the Mario Puzo's book is part 1 and 2, but in a very different order. It starts with young Corleone family coming from Italy and him rising up, and which is basically half the plot of the second one contrasted with the rise of Michael. And so what they do is they edit it like the movie. So it starts with the young Vito Corleone and then ends with with Kay, him going, "You gotta ask me about," oh no, that's actually the end of 1. It's like he kills Fredo at the end of 2 or something, and she leaves or something. I forget how. I need to watch The Godfather again. It's been a few years, but anyway, it has almost a more like a novel approach to it, and I feel like in some ways that's a way you could almost get a novelish approach to Star Wars. But it's just at this point when people have seen these movies hundreds of times, these little games are kind of a fun way to re-experience it.
Yeah.
Did we?
So you were just on to go back. You said watching the interviews with people. I'll just say I went to the dentist on Monday. The Monday after Thanksgiving. I was like, oh, that's a good time to schedule a dentist appointment. And for the last couple of years, I guess they have the dentist I go to has like individual TVs in the different rooms where you get your teeth worked on. And usually those TVs are turned off when I show up, and then they ask if I want the TV on, and I usually say no. They're like, "Really? You don't want the TV on?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's fine. I don't need to watch commercials while you're, flossing me or whatever." But this time the TV was already on when I got in, and it was on Good Morning America, I guess. It was like the tail end of Good Morning America, and Daisy Ridley was on. She was basically making the rounds because she was on that, and then she was also on the Kelly Ripa show, which was on right after Good Morning America. So she was basically like going through the grinder that day or that that week. This week,
you actually mean Daisy Ridley?
Yeah. Who did I say?
Well, I was like, why is she doing the rounds for this movie?
Oh yeah, no, it was Daisy Ridley. I mean,
wow.
she's going to be the face of this movie, I guess. She's kind of, as much as they talk about it being an ensemble movie, she's okay.
She's
essentially the face of it.
I'm going to be a jerk here and butt in. You don't mean Felicity Jones?
Oh yeah, Felicity Jones. Okay. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Oh man,
you're just confusing me. It's like,
well, and then when you're like, wait, Daisy Ridley, I was like, who do I mean? Dummy. Felicity Jones. So Felicity Jones was making the rounds.
Okay.
And so Good Morning America, like it was pretty clear that initially I thought that she was just kind of tired of talking about Star Wars, but I think it was just really early in the morning because she was just kind of like, yeah, working on Star Wars is great. Sure. Yeah, it was fun. And then, then after that, she was on the Kelly Ripa show, which was, and her interview there was she showed a little more enthusiasm, and she they, you know, the first half of the interview, they asked her about other stuff, other movies that she was in and her, you know, Oscar nomination or whatever. And then they talked about Star Wars and how much, you know, oh, were you a big fan of Star Wars growing up? In my house, it was this big thing. But Billy Eichner, the
oh yeah,
core of the story is Billy Eichner was the co-host for Kelly Ripa that day. And for those of you who don't know, Billy Eichner, he has a show called Billy on the Street, but then he's also on Difficult People. You know,
basically playing himself. I get the feeling.
Yeah, more or less a less successful version of himself.
Right.
Because I don't think Billy on Difficult People would ever get asked to co-host with Kelly Ripa. But you know, it just basically he doesn't care about Star Wars at all, either on the show or in real life. And so there was this great moment where Kelly Ripa at the top of the show, they're basically just like chit-chatting about their Thanksgiving, and Kelly Ripa is telling super boring stories, and Billy Eichner has to pretend to be interested. But then there's this great moment where Kelly Ripa asks Billy Eichner if he like, oh, have you got your Rogue One tickets yet? And there's like this flash in his eyes, and like me knowing that he absolutely just doesn't care about Star Wars. Like I had the dentist's hands in my mouth. So I could, but I wanted to burst out laughing. It was so great. And he would like, he was cool about it, but like you could see this like flash in his eyes. And then he was like, oh, have they released the tickets yet? I didn't know they got released yet. And then Kelly Ripa was like, they've released them, right? And then he like said something to change the subject. He basically didn't answer the question because he didn't want to be like, no, I don't care about Star Wars.
I don't know why that is. It's like, you know what it is? It's like, I feel like I enjoy Star Wars. I've gotten so much enjoyment out of Star Wars that at this point, the only way I can eke more enjoyment is watching how much people don't care about Star Wars when it's like kind of when there's like a big thing in the news. That's perfect. It's just like,
well, I mean, and yeah, like the fact that he doesn't care about Star Wars, like that's perfectly fine.
Absolutely.
But there's this, you know, there is this cultural kind of bias towards like everyone's supposed to like Star Wars, even if you're not super into it, and even if you haven't read all of the EU novels, and even if you don't collect anything, there's this kind of general sense of like, oh yeah, you like Star Wars, right? It's this big cultural touchstone in America, and so there's just this assumption that anyone you talk to is going to be like, yeah, you're even if you're not super into it, you're going to go see Star Wars, right? And especially now that it's every year, it's like oh, you're going to go see the new Star Wars, and so yeah, just to have that like. To know that backstory and to have that moment, like I'm sure for people watching who didn't know who he was, it was just this kind of like weird, awkward thing. But to have that behind it of like I can't imagine what was going through his mind at that.
Well, it reminds me of like, and hopefully people were more didn't pick up on it because like last year, what was it? There's a I don't know. She's like an on-air personality. I think she's on Fox News, named Kat Timpf, and she kind of prodded the Star Wars nerds. Like, I don't care about Star Wars. Star Wars is for kids. It's like something like that. And she got like death threats. It's sad, but she did. She goes like people wanted blood because she was like, yeah, Star Wars is for kids. I mean, and you got to have a sense of humor about your fandom. Or at least I think you do. At least that's my takeaway from it. It's
absolutely.
Otherwise, people are always going to know how to tweak your nose about it.
Right.
I think one of the things that's fun about Star Wars is not everybody's into it. It's kind of like, even though it's like one of the most popular film franchises of all time, that doesn't mean every single person's watching it or knows is like waiting with bated breath. Heck, I know some Star Wars fans aren't even excited about this movie, but I don't know about that. I don't know about them.
Who knows?
What else? I'm sorry.
But so
I just keep on thinking of Billy Eichner going, I want to see that. I got to go look that up. That look on his face.
It's a funny moment, especially because he had just spent the last like 10 minutes listening to Kelly Ripa talk about her Thanksgiving Doogie Howser, what's his name? Neil Patrick Harris. Like she went to Neil Patrick Harris's house for Thanksgiving, and so she was like talking about that, but apparently nothing interesting happened. So she was just talking about how many different kinds of turkey they had, and like watching Billy Eichner try to like feign interest in that, and then have her spring on him. So have you gotten your Rogue One tickets yet? It was a very good moment.
Oh man,
yeah,
perfect.
Yeah.
Should we start talk about this?
So we are getting more information about Rogue One.
Yes, we will talk about. We're not going to be 100% spoiler free. No. We're going to be talking about this Michael Giacchino thing.
Yeah.
Is that
there's
go into?
Yeah. Let's start there. So last week, Entertainment Weekly had their big Rogue One issue, and in the run up to that, like they did with The Force Awakens, they had different teases or longer interviews. Whatever you want to call them, on the website. And so they had one with Michael Giacchino talking about the score and how the fact that he was a kind of emergency replacement for Alexander Desplat. And there's some interesting, I mean, it's actually more interesting than I expected it to be, and more revealing about different things. So I encourage people to look at. So we'll just go through a couple of these things. So first is, again, this fact that he was this emergency replacement. He really had 4 weeks to work on the score. I mean, there's a good possibility that they're still like mixing the score as we speak. But so the interviewer goes, "Oh, 4 weeks doesn't seem like enough time." And Giacchino goes like, "Well, it's not really, but you work with the time you have." It's just like, ooh, I don't. I mean, I'm sure almost every film composer, or maybe even every film composer, has had some projects where they're just like, well, I just have to do this, and I have to do this very quickly, and whatever comes out is what's going to come out. And that's why, some composers are more well regarded than others, because they can take that time limit and come up with something good in that 4 weeks. But that does not sound super encouraging in terms of like what kind of product we could expect from this score. It's like, yep, you just gotta work with what you have, and you just manage it somehow. It's like, yeah, he could have maybe phrased that in a more optimistic way, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, but isn't it one of those situations where they go, it's like, isn't in some ways he's been preparing for this his whole career,
Yeah, basically.
I mean, if I get the idea of a guy, obviously he won the Oscars for something, or he's been at least nominated. But he's been a professional for a long time, but that for a guy like him, I don't think he's made any bones about the fact that John Williams has been a influence, and especially Star Wars. So it's like, it's almost like, yeah, okay, I understand that it could be a little nerve-wracking, but it's like he's kind of probably had something in the back of his head about at least what he would do, and maybe that puts him a little bit ahead of the game, but who knows? He might be like, he might have shown up and said, well, I never thought about it really, and they're like, oh, great.
Right.
I mean, I don't really understand what there is some talk about that he might be reusing some of the pre-existing themes. So it's not like
so later in the interview, he talks about how 95% of the score is all original, but then there are some maybe accents of the John Williams scores that work their way in, and I guess because Darth Vader is in this movie, and it's about the Empire. The interviewer asked, "Oh, so does that mean we'll hear your take on the Imperial March?" And he was kind of quiet. He was like, "Maybe." So we very well may hear a version of the Imperial March in this, among other things. So yeah, it does sound like, which I guess surprised me in some ways and not in others. I mean, it surprised me in the sense that, or maybe surprise isn't the word, but it just kind of hit home of like, oh, right, this music doesn't really belong to John Williams, right? Like, certainly this is John Williams music, this meaning, the scores from the previous 6 movies, right? The Star Wars scores are John Williams music, but in terms of, their use, and I don't know why I thought of Giacchino using them as being different from Kevin Kiner using them on Rebels, because he certainly, drops in, the Rebel fanfare and other people's, themes and things like that. And so it's not like I haven't heard that stuff out of context. I mean, we both talked about that when we kind of reviewed the season 1 of Rebel soundtrack.
Yeah.
But I for some reason it just kind of hit me a little differently hearing that Giacchino is using some of the John Williams stuff in here. Is like, oh, okay, so I guess this is how they're going to handle it, and this is like Disney Lucasfilm owns the rights to this music, and so if they want to have someone else, use it, that's going to be fine, and it's Star Wars music, it's not John Williams music, but at the same time, John Williams is so such a big part of the story and such a big part of Star Wars and how that connection between the movies and the film scores, that to have someone else kind of say, well, I'll just take what you did and I'll just use it in however I want to use it. It just kind of hit me a little oddly, but I don't know if I'm sure I'm overthinking this, but
well, I don't think you're overthinking it. I mean, I honestly feel like that might have something to do with maybe why Alexander Desplat left. The idea that there is kind of a house style, but they're not quite ready on the second movie of this new Disney Star Wars juggernaut, that they're ready to break completely free of everything that made Star Wars what it is, meaning that kind of, John Williams riff on Eric Korngold, kind of, whatever, Wagner and Holst and those kind of things, even though I think that John Williams has really, really, when we talk about those kind of things, that's very specifically the soundtrack to A New Hope. I feel like, I'm no music expert, but I feel like he kind of branched out from that as movies subsequently went on. He actually made the style his own. And I mean, if Giacchino is going to be, he's just a one-off for this, or this could be, kind of his way of maybe, we've always talked about what happens eventually when John Williams decides, like, either I'm not, I don't have the energy to do a Star Wars movie, like even a saga film, or God forbid, when he passes or whatever, and they want to do more saga films, like who's gonna take over? And in some ways, this might be kind of an opportunity for Giacchino to kind of, it's like, well, we'll try him out on the road. We know he's talented. We know he's gonna, even if it's not, a perfect Star Wars score, we know we're going to get a very competent score. He's not like one of these guys where it's just like, oh, I'll just throw something together. I can't even, I don't want to throw shade on any other composers, but every time you see a movie, I will say this, that, I know there's people in the Disney umbrella that do scores for movies, and it's like their scores are completely like devoid of any kind of excitement. It's not something I ever like go, oh yeah, I'd like to hear that after the movie's over ever again, And I think that's the best, long story short, I think that's the best way to describe like a really good Star Wars score. Is that something you're going to listen to outside of the film itself? It's like when the credits have rolled, are you going to grab your CD or your MP3, or are you going to listen to it? I mean, I did that with The Force Awakens, not as much as I had in the past, but I still did it. And I'm hoping that, that what he's out there is going to have enough where it's going to feel Star Wars, he's going to have a way to put his own, by using the house style, he can put his own signature on it. So it's not just like, oh, he completely ripped off this and he completely ripped off that. I mean, it's hard because a month, that doesn't sound like a lot of time to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, you alluded to something too that he addresses in this, where it certainly sounds like there's another story behind Alexander Desplat leaving than the scheduling issues that we were given. I mean, he's even asked, like, oh, have you heard anything about why Desplat left? And Giacchino says, and this is all a quote, he says, I'll tell you, I actually don't know an awful lot about that. They were like, do you want to know what happened? And my response was, you know what, when this is all over, we can sit and talk and have a drink and you can tell me whatever you want. I'd love to hear the story, but for right now, I feel like I'd rather just pretend nothing happened and everything is good, and I'm just going to come on to this. And they were like, yeah, fair enough. So honestly, I don't know anything about it other than what was purportedly, schedule issues. So it does sound like, I mean, if the filmmakers were like, oh, do you want to know what happened? That means something happened.
Right.
Right. Something happened that led to Desplat not being the composer for Rogue One anymore. I assume we will hear at some point. That may be like 20 years in the future or whatever. But it's, this is where, too, I think, I'm thinking about the fact that we're not getting that kind of the making of Episode 7 book, at least not right now when we were expected to get it.
Right.
Maybe that comes out in 20 years or something. But I do wonder how much kind of image management Disney is going to exert over the stories of how these things were made, and compared to at least the original trilogy. By the time you got up to the prequel trilogy, a lot of it was kind of, straight from Lucas, and Lucas, he didn't exert tight control over it, but a lot of it was about like, oh, isn't Lucas a genius? And this is his vision, and here's all the good stuff about it. And we're not really reporting any problems that happened, or, rough spots, or, this actor. I mean, there weren't any like dark stories or, attacks or anything in the books about the making of the original trilogy, but there were like honest assessments of, George Lucas doesn't know how to write a script, and so he had to get other people to do it for him while he sat in the room and just like pitched ideas.
Right.
And so, I do wonder either whether we're going to hear it all, or even how far down the road we're going to hear some of the stories like this of, okay, so why did Desplat end up leaving the picture? Because again, the way this was phrased, the way at least Giacchino phrased it, if the makers of Rogue One are like, oh, do you want to know what happened? That means something happened.
Yeah.
That they thought Giacchino might want to know about going in. Right. Like, I don't think they were just being gossipy. So yeah, it does sound like, there's a reason that Desplat is not working on this picture anymore. Now,
and we'll
find out what that is.
I think EW had even kind of said, well, aren't you worried you're coming into a situation where the composer left and you might end up giving them music,
right,
that they, it's exactly like Desplat said, the kind of things.
Right. They asked him if he had listened to any of what Desplat did, and he was like, no, I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to go in with my own thing.
So, yeah, I mean, I honestly makes me wonder that, like, they're just saying, like, probably on the surface, they're like, hey, we need something different. There was a composition. It was a composed music. I'm sorry. Music was composed. Obviously, Lucasfilm wasn't too hot about it. I mean, that in stepping back from the Giacchino thing, it's just kind of, have you read this little bit of clickbait about Tony Gilroy and his millions that he's supposedly making off of his rewrites for Rogue One?
No, I haven't.
So that was the big clickbait thing that came out earlier this week, that it's Tony Gilroy was being like $200,000 a week to recraft the Rogue One script from where it was around the time of Celebration, the reshoots and whatnot. I mean, it basically, a lot of people talk about, oh, this is a sign that it's another sign that this movie had much more extensive reshoots in it than originally was planned. Some of it I've heard goes as far as they expanded the role of Bodhi Rook in the movie. I mean, I don't know what this means. It's just like mostly the salacious part was the idea that he was making, he's the one making the millions off of this, not anyone else. None of the other actors who are, respected actors, but aren't necessarily A-listers yet. But it does make me wonder. It's like how much of this, when movies are put together kind of, and I don't want to, we haven't seen it yet, but it's the idea where it's like any kind of artistic output that's put together, like there's so much tinkering in the back end. It raises real questions of like, how many movies do we know that, like, you know, in recent history, it's like the number one movie I can think of that went through something like this was World War Z. That movie had, you know, and even, well, maybe not Prometheus, because Prometheus was a script thing, but they'd already shot World War Z. It had a huge, you know, 20, 30, 40 million dollar ending that they completely scrapped for one that was actually more of like a $10 million ending. And you're like, oh yeah, what's going on here? And it turned out, you know, World War Z, you know, you can just blame the source material. It just didn't turn out to be a very satisfying film. You know, there's not going to be a sequel, but I mean, Rogue One is kind of one of those situations where they don't have to worry about sequels. I mean, the sequel's already built in. You know, that's a big thing, was like, no surprise around here. Like, there's not going to be a sequel to Rogue One. I mean, I guess it's not a surprise, because I actually had thought to myself, like, well, you know, if it turns out that people love these characters and some of them survive, like, why couldn't you have, you know, how did they find the Hoth base, or, you know, that kind of thing. It's like they could, there could be a series of these movies, but maybe that's just not something that's worth, you know, spending $100 million on. And like, oh, we've got one about how they got the plans, and now we're going to do one about how they found Hoth, or how the Bothan spies actually did get the information that turned out to be actually the Emperor wanted them to have it all along. So, I mean, I guess it makes sense that it's going to be a one shot and done, but yeah, the pedigree of all these things kind of, you know, $1 million rewrites, $1 million reshoots, last minute leaving of the composer. I mean, if this was anything other than a Star Wars film, I would be just like, I'd probably be like completely negative about it. But it's such a pre-existing franchise, and I think that it's possible for people to look at this and actually, you know, riff on it and come up with good solutions to problems. Like, you know, I still haven't pulled the trigger on that 3D Force Awakens set for the commentary, but what I've gathered from little snippets online is that, you know, there was a lot of filmmaking by committee, you know, and for better or worse, I think that the end result was pretty good. I mean, it was a lot better than I thought it was possibly going to be. I thought it would just be a hot mess of a movie. So, I mean, the idea that, you know, J.J. Abrams is like, you know, getting input from like Ava DuVernay and you know, even, I think, was Spielberg even? I think maybe they talked to Spielberg. Probably. They're producing partners. He probably chatted with Spielberg. So it's like this idea where it's like somebody kind of, it's again, it's the house style. It's like the fact that, you know, Jim Davis doesn't draw Garfield, but if you look at Garfield, I don't hear people complaining like Garfield isn't what it used to be. It's like, yeah, he hasn't been involved in it. The one problem is that when you end up when like it becomes one of these situations where it's just, you know, they just slap a name on it and it doesn't bear any response, you know, any connection to what came before. That's the problem when, you know, they don't try to kind of, you know, I think that's why the story group is good. But even that being said, I can't imagine that they were that involved in Rogue One if they're paying somebody else to work on it, you know? Yeah. Anyway. It is kind of a new situation for them. And I mean, in some ways, you know, we talk about Rogue One being an experiment in terms, or they've talked about Rogue One being an experiment in terms of what the movie looks like, but this is also kind of an experiment in how they produce these movies, how they kind of manage how these movies are made. And they may find that the way they worked on Rogue One and you know, bringing in Gilroy and I guess every movie will present its own unique challenges, and some may have script problems and some may not, and some may have other issues that need to be addressed and others won't. But just in general, you know, they may find that the way that they kind of went about making Rogue One, you know, 6 years from now, they're like, all right, let's talk about lessons learned and maybe what we do differently.
or hopefully not 6 years from now, or this really did work, and so this is the model we're going to replicate, from now on, and we'll have a different director come in and do the reshoots for all of them, and whatever it ends up being. So it'll be interesting to see how much of what's happened with this, with Desplat, with Gilroy, and all that, how much of that gets repeated in these other Star Wars movies as they're going down.
Well, and the funny thing is I like to check the Twitter while we record, and
sure,
we just got a hot take or a hot tip from Star Wars Underworld. It's at the SWU. Dominic Jones wrote an article about John Williams begins recording music for episode 8 this month.
Yes.
So this is almost all academic because, to be honest, the maestro, as they call him, he's going to be, we're going to get another hour of music from him, another piece of the tapestry that people can riff off of. So like I said, it's, maybe I didn't say it, but I definitely don't want to get to a point where people we're going to be really experimental with the music, and it becomes like Logan's Run, which I love those old 70s sci-fi soundtracks, but orchestral music for Star Wars, to me, it just feels like that. Anything other than that, you can't do like Dave Grusin for the Firm, where it's like treated piano and some guy with a violin and a looping pedal. It's like, no, I don't need Neil Young in front of like episode 9 with his guitar, and I love Neil Young, but I don't need him like improvising with his guitar in front of the Han Solo movie or whatever.
You mentioned a guy with a violin and a looping pedal. An Owen Pallett Star Wars score actually would be really interesting, I think, but I also don't know how I would react to it, because I like him and I like his music a lot, and he kind of straddles that, orchestral, but also, electronic and kind of minimalist stuff sometimes, and he's collaborated with Brian Eno, and he's also written, orchestration stuff for other pop stars, and he's written kind of concert pieces. But yeah, I don't see them kind of tapping him and be like, hey, why don't you bring your violin and your Max MSP giving this a go.
Exactly.
But yeah,
I mean, like I said, that's if what's his face, like that kind of stuff is great for and I was just about ready to say his name and I've now blanked on it. Oh, Shane Carruth. If Shane Carruth makes his third crazy sci-fi movie, you want to get Owen Pallett to do the soundtrack, that's fine, that's great. But Star Wars, actually,
he might be a good choice for the new Blade Runner movie.
Ooh.
Come to think of it.
What, you talking about? Vangelis isn't coming back for that?
I haven't heard, but I suppose anything's possible. I can't imagine Vangelis would be cheap.
I mean, I don't even, is Vangelis, I mean, I know I think he's still alive.
He's still alive. I just looked it up after you asked.
Has anybody checked on him? Is he just like stuck under his Yamaha synth? And it's like,
he is
I've been trapped under here for 6 weeks. Help me.
He is 73 years young.
Oh, he's not even that old. When did we become like saying 73 isn't that old? Because it kind of is old. I'm sorry.
It is and it isn't.
It isn't. I will say that.
Yeah.
We are way off the.
But just real quick to wrap up this discussion, in this thing about John Williams, about to start recording the episode 8 score, it says he expects to record off and on through March or April 2017. So that's kind of, because I don't think even for episode 7 that he took like 4 or 5 months, off and on to record. I mean, I think, they did it over a couple of weeks. I could be wrong, but
no, I think you're right.
But so I don't know if that means that he is approaching this differently, where he'll write part of the score and then record that part, and then finish up the rest of it and record that, and then write a couple more cues and then record those. If this is a nod to his schedule, if this is a nod to his age, honestly, if this is,
I wonder if it's a nod to
if this is
sorry.
to, well, just, to what he's able to do and the kind of the workload that he's able to shoulder. And because he also, I don't know if he's going to be conducting these either. And how, this, if he does want to keep conducting these recordings, he may have decided that, it's a more spaced out schedule is better for him and for his energy. I'm assuming a lot, and I hate, pointing to age as being a reason for this. But as you point out, that is the reality, that at some point we're not going to have John Williams to score these movies anymore. So yeah, this is another thing where it's like, I wonder if we'll ever hear why they did it this way, and if, they'll be honest, or if they'll just say like, oh, it has about scheduling the, orchestra or something like that.
It almost makes me wonder though, if maybe, I think might be a little bit of everything you're saying. It's like, the economy of, a guy in his 80s about scheduling and stuff. And then they're like, hey, don't bring me out and have me score your movie in an assembly and then find out that 20 minutes of it's going to be reshot.
Right.
And I have to go back and rescore your movie, or you're going to chop it up in the editing bay, which, I know that was a lot of the schism, at least in the rumors that I've heard, between Ben Burtt and Williams, especially around Attack of the Clones. There was a lot of like give and take, because I think Ben Burtt actually did edit the Phantom Menace.
Well, he edited it, and he did some of the pre-visualization stuff for episode 2. So he around episode 2, he became even more heavily involved in how these are made.
Yeah, and there was there was kind of like this give and take of real estate. At least this is the rumor. This is the, I'm being very Rona Barrett about this. I've heard rumors. That
many people are saying.
Many people are saying, my readers want to know, is John Williams and Ben Burtt no longer going to the steakhouse afterwards? The smokehouse for steaks? But yeah, I guess anytime I find out that he's still involved, even like I said, even though I was, although, I keep dissing The Force Awakens in comparison to the other ones, but every time I hear it, like if another podcast will have it in their bumper music between segments or something like that, I'll be like, what? I'm like, I'll be listening, going, what is this? And I'm like, oh, it's The Force Awakens. There's a lot more in there than I even, a lay person when it comes to music can appreciate. It's like, I think that's a score that I will be coming back to, especially when we ramp up to 8. I'm gonna revisit that a lot.
Oh yeah, I listened to it a lot actually. And it's funny though, I actually end up skipping the Ray's theme track, which I know seems sacrilegious.
Yeah, it's like that's supposedly his inspiration or whatever.
Well, and that's what everyone loves. But the only reason I skip it is because most of that is already in the right. So the Ray's theme track is just kind of a concert piece, or a distillation or a expansion rather. Where a lot of that music is already in the track called The Scavenger, and so it like at the point in the CD where you get Ray's theme, it's like they've been building up momentum, and they're being chased and they're evading the First Order, and now we're going to go back in Ray's theme, and then after that we're going to pick it back up in the middle of the chase, and it just kind of interrupts the momentum. But anyway, it's I'll be curious to see if he ends up conducting these as well, or if what's his name, Gustavo Dudamel, takes on more of the conducting responsibilities, or if they get someone else. And even, they got basically a freelance orchestra for episode 7. How many of those same musicians are going to be back? Because that was, even with the prequels, they still use the London Symphony. And even though there were a lot of different musicians than there were with the original trilogy, there was this kind of in-house LSO sound that John Williams talked about, so that even though there were a lot of new players from 30 years prior, or 25 years prior, that it still sounded very similar. The feel of it was the same. And so now that they're recording these scores in LA, from even discounting the Rogue One score, but from 7 to 8, how many of those musicians are going to be the same? And is the score going to feel differently, in part because they're going to have different players on it, not just the fact that it's a different sounding, a different score. The people that you get to play it affect kind of how it sounds to some degree as well. So that also will be. I mean, and I have no idea how you parse that out, honestly.
Well, we do know that the timpani will be on point of all these, because John Williams, I don't know, older or little brother or whatever, is playing timpani on the Rogue One score. Which
apparently he has played on every Michael Giacchino score ever, according to Michael Giacchino. And so he's also going to be on Rogue One, and so there will be apparently a lot of timpani in the score. And then beyond that, Giacchino gave some other hints of kind of, they're going to have a little more ethereal things and this and that. So yeah, there will be some of that connection. Yeah.
And I'm looking at your outline here, and I notice he talks a bit. Giacchino's got he calls it a really good World War II movie in regards to Rogue One.
Yeah. Right.
And then I didn't realize that until recently, that he had been the composer for the Medal of Honor series, which was like I went and looked it up. Especially because I haven't really played much Call of Duty when it was first starting, but I have played those Medal of Honors, and they had really good scores. I mean, I think they were connected to, those series were connected to DreamWorks at the time, which was that, the Katzenberg and Geffen and Spielberg's company. And they would kind of basically do these games. Like now they look like garbage in comparison, but it was the best they could do in the 90s and the aughts for PlayStation. They had these, almost cinematic presentations of World War II video games, and the scores were really good. I mean, it's kind of like, I do remember that, and they were very percussive, kind of so maybe that's kind of what we're getting. So if that's true, then maybe I'm a little bit more heartened, because I realize that, at least those games, the music gave a pretty good overall experience. Is not to go off on video games, but a lot of times I don't even pay attention to the scores of games anymore. It's kind of, I've got headphones on, I'm listening to something else. So it's like this, at least back then, that was definitely something I stood and took notice about. So, I guess that falls under the, in the realm of that's good news, maybe?
Right.
I don't know. Did we have anything more about this Giacchino thing, or are we going to move on?
No, I'm comfortable moving on. Wired magazine had a profile of John Knoll as well, which I thought was really, really interesting for how just kind of, John Knoll, basically everything he's done, all of his fantastic accomplishments that I wouldn't say he's famous, but within the industry he's known for, and among people who follow these things, are basically started out as hobbies, because he was really interested in X, and then that became his job, and he was like, well, I don't want, now that this is my job and not just a hobby, I'm going to need to find some other thing to be my hobby. And so then he would start doing Y, and then that would become his job, because he got so good at it. With the prequels, there was some stuff he was like, I'll bet I could do this on commercial graphic software. And he would tell everyone else at ILM, and they would be like, no, that's silly. We have a whole department who can do that. We'll have them do it. And he's like, all right, well, we'll see who does it better. And then he was able to complete it in 4 days, just using a Mac that you buy at the store. And the whole ILM department hadn't been able to do it in a month. And so then they were like, all right, fine. We'll just do your thing. Right. And so just he's clearly some kind of genius, because that he just knows how to do all this stuff. and can figure it out, and has been able to have a family and do all that stuff too. But just his kind of like unassuming, like, yeah, I want to give this a shot. And then he's like the best in the world at doing that, almost, or one of the best in the world at doing that. So I thought it was kind of fascinating in that way. But then there's an interesting and kind of italics here about how he ended up pitching the story for Rogue One. It says, so this is quoting first the story and then John Knoll. It says, an early word on the plots of the new movies didn't impress him. The first couple were kind of backstory, Knoll says, how Han and Chewie got to be the characters that we know in episode 4. And I thought, yeah, but what I really want to see is more of an action-adventure story. Something that has some of the Star Wars themes, maybe it touches on things we know, but it's all new characters. And so then, just like at lunch, he would start thinking about this stuff and then start telling his friends who worked at ILM in the cafeteria or at like trivia night or something. They're like, hey, we've got half an hour to kill. Do you want to hear this idea I have for a Star Wars movie? And then that worked its way up into like, okay, you should pitch Kathleen Kennedy about this. And then Kathleen Kennedy admits to like being nervous. She was like, oh, am I going to get pitches from everyone at this company? She's like, how many people who work here have like a Star Wars movie they want to pitch me? But, as she says, part of what makes Knoll so good at what he does is he can kind of distill everything down to its essence and make it really clear and understandable. And so it wasn't this like whole convoluted thing. It was a very simple idea, but it was a big idea that was described and could be described very simply, and that was what was attractive about it. But just that whole idea of like these, the ideas for these anthologies movies being around, the young Han Solo movie, maybe the young Boba Fett, or the not the young Boba Fett movie, but the kind of 20s 30s Boba Fett movie. He was kind of like, I'm not really into that. Like, that's fine, but we should be introducing new characters as well and not just rehashing old ground. Like, I think that's really interesting that came from him and not from someone, not from like the Lucasfilm story group, right? And I'm sure they and Kathleen Kennedy have all these other pressures of like, okay, this is kind of a new thing we're trying. Let's maybe start with characters that we know people will want to see in movies, right? We know how to sell a Han Solo movie. Like, that's easy enough, or it should be easy enough. And Knoll was the one saying like, no, I have this idea. That's not interesting enough. Like, let's maybe take more of a risk in introducing these all new characters that we have to sell as new characters. And that I thought was kind of really interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's the guy's obviously a phenom of some type, because it's like most of my hobbies just end up becoming half-finished things in my basement. So it's like I don't just like one weekend, I'm bored, I'll invent Photoshop. But, maybe it takes a guy like a John Knoll who's been, kicking around Lucasfilm. So I don't know what year he started there, but it's, at least around the time of the special editions or around the prequels.
Yeah, I think he was freelancing with ILM for a little while. Like, he worked on The Abyss.
Okay.
It might have been while he was still in college, even, maybe. Or there were a couple things that he worked on for ILM as a freelancer while he was still in college, and then after college, they basically hired him. So he's been there for a while. But he started out as a camera operator, and then he was a camera operator, and then he started doing computer graphic stuff as a hobby. And then that became the thing he does.
But I mean, I guess my point is that if Star Wars is not something that's super sacrosanct to a guy like him, whereas like, and I don't know how it's viewed inside Lucasfilm, basically, I was going to say inmates running the asylum, but that's a terrible analogy. But now it's, I'm sure that Lucasfilm is stocked with an entire generation of people that never knew a world without Star Wars. And it was like, that is that's the touchstone for a lot of these people's, maybe their entry into the film industry or the media industry. So, and a guy like John Knoll, even though he might have, I don't know how, he's probably in his late 40s, early 50s, but he knew a time before that. He grew up, he saw kind of how the sausage was made. So he's, like I said, it's not so, it's not like this sacred thing that he can't go, hey, it doesn't just have to be a rehash of the same, 30 characters that we, in the tapestry of Star Wars. It doesn't just have to be about the Jedi. It doesn't just have to be about, the Han Solos and the Princess Leia's. It's like they can, we can tell a parallel story almost.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's, it was a really smart idea. I mean, I think that's and it's really it almost feels like this might be the only time they can tell a story like this, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, what, like I said earlier, it's like they keep hammering this idea that, this is a one-off. It's like we can only tell this story once, and it's kind of nice that way, because again, in the litany of the Star Wars pantheon of stories, it's like this story has been told so many times. It's sometimes it was Kyle Katarn stealing the plan. Sometimes the Death Star was created in the, what's the name of that weird vortex in the Jedi Academy trilogy. It's like, it's like now they have this one event and they're going to pin it down. Not that they're going to need to do that with a lot of other things, but just this, I'm going off into a weird, I don't even know what I'm saying at this point. Basically, my point is that John Knoll was very smart to do this.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, really that kind of seems to be what he does, right? He's very, I mean, you could say, and I have said, I guess, these things become his hobbies, and then that becomes his job. I mean, another interpretation would be that he's very smart at kind of identifying what kind of the next thing is going to be, or it could be that he genuinely gets interested in this stuff, and he's just at the forefront of people being interested in these things, computer graphics and using over the counter commercial software to do these things, and whatever else, and that this is part of that, right? He kind of identified before anyone else it did, or at least he expressed before anyone else there did, that hey, maybe we create some new characters, and I don't know, maybe that gives him too much credit, because we also don't know, right? He mentions the kind of young Han Solo movie because that, I assume, because that's the one that's actually being made, but who knows what other kind of stories they were working on. It makes sense to me that they would focus on stuff like Han Solo and Boba Fett, because again, those are known characters that you can market kind of right out of the box, and how to market a Han Solo movie. But there could have been other members of the Lucasfilm Story Group, or just other people at Lucasfilm or ILM or whatever, that just had this idea kicking around, and because he's John Knoll, he was able to get access to Kathleen Kennedy and pitch this idea, and so he just kind of got there first. But I think it does speak to kind of his brain and his ability to, or at least the way he thinks seems to be kind of the right. He seems to be good at identifying or expressing kind of the right next steps that ILM and Lucasfilm now need to move in at various points in its history.
Agreed. Yeah, and just as a quick aside, did you hear that? I can't remember, we mentioned this last week. Did you hear about, like, speaking of Boba Fett, that we all know that Trank was working on a Boba Fett thing before he was let go, or he quit. Did you know that they were actually going to do a teaser at Celebration this year?
I read that, yeah. Well, because originally I think that was scheduled to be the second anthology movie, right? And then the Han Solo movie was going to be the third. And then they cut out the Boba Fett movie, and were like, oh, I guess this Han Solo movie is our second one. I think I have that right. So yeah, I mean, that would have been kind of, and they did a teaser for Rogue One, and it was basically just an image of like the silhouette of the Death Star hanging above a planet.
Yeah, it was
or
like
something
a motion
like that.
comic almost.
Right. So I imagine the teaser for Boba Fett would have been something similar, maybe a shot of the helmet, or something, a still image essentially that took them maybe a day to make. I don't think it was going to be footage or anything like that.
But it almost makes me wonder, though, that if they're being kind of letting that out there, maybe the Boba Fett movie isn't even in pre-production anymore. You know, like they're not even looking to pursue it at this point. It's kind of like, well, maybe we'll just let that one go, kind of situation.
Right.
Or
well,
it's being moved to that TV series that they're keep on threatening to make.
Right. Well, Simon Kinberg is currently working on a Star Wars script. It's not known what it is. He didn't say what it is. He just said, "Oh, I'm starting to work on a new Star Wars film script." I think a lot of people are assuming that will be Boba Fett, but I also feel like if it was, they would have announced that by now. And it's also interesting too that Kathleen Kennedy has said, okay, well after Rogue One comes out, or sometime in the near future, they're going to kind of, or maybe after the Young Han Solo movie comes out, they're going to sit down and kind of evaluate what they want the next steps to be after Episode 9, and kind of where they want to move, what direction they want to move in. Are they going to make another Skywalker trilogy, or just an Episode 10? If nothing else, are they going to keep making these anthology films? Are they going to branch out and do the TV show, whatever? So she's kind of said, oh, okay, well, soon we'll start making those decisions and start with this kind of strategic plan. But at the same time, if Kinberg's already working on a script, like they've already made some of those decisions, it would seem. And so, yeah, when and where and how we kind of find out about all this stuff, and whether the Boba Fett movie is still part of that, or whether it's not part of that. I mean, these are all, it all seems very fluid right now still. As much as they kind of say, okay, well, we're in this period of making these new Star Wars movies, and then we're going to kind of pause and reevaluate and then move on from there. It seems more fluid than that.
Yeah. I mean, sometime, not this week, we definitely, as more information, is that we should almost do a McLaughlin group type breakdown of whether or not Simon Kinberg is actually valuable as a writer, especially now that I've seen his last big one was the last X-Men movie, and boy, P-Usa. It's like, I don't know. I mean, sometimes whatever.
I mean, we talked about this, I think, when that news came out. Like, Kinberg doesn't have the best track record when it comes to his movies, but who knows how much of that is him versus the studio versus the director. Versus
it's like that thing where there was this guy named Akiva Goldsman that works. I think he works with Ron Howard a lot, and his name has been all over some really crappy movies, but then his name has been on some pretty good movies. So I mean, like I said, we'll save that for another week. When because I feel like we're throwing a lot of shade on these guys already. Do you want to move on to some of these Han Solo?
Well, so do you want to talk about the Battlefront sequel?
Yeah, I mean,
are you excited about the sequel to Battlefront? We've talked about this a little bit. Well, so first, the CFO of Electronic Arts, I almost called it Entertainment Arts because of Entertainment Weekly. But the CFO of EA was at some investor briefing in Europe, and he said, well, if there's any criticism of Battlefront, people just wanted more. And so the sequel is going to be bigger. It's going to leverage the new movies. And then on top of that, just today, we got a trailer for the Scarif expansion
that comes out,
which looks like, which is going to have Jyn Erso in it and Orson Krennic. And, you're going to be on the planet Scarif from Rogue One. So, I mean, are you still on board for Battlefront, or do you think that it's you've enjoyed some of it and you're ready to move on to something else?
So I have this I go back and forth on this because it's like as a person that likes those kind of games, it's I was disappointed and then I was all right, and then I was disappointed and then I was all right, and now that EA, DICE or whatever they came out with their new entry into the Battlefield series, which is, for people who don't play, it's like there's Call of Duty and there's Battlefield, and they're different companies, and I'm more of a Battlefield guy. And I'm really enjoying this one, which is kind of a mock take on World War One, and it's much more in depth. There's vehicles, there's kind of the graphics are great. It's like you feel like you're in a battle. And the problem with Battlefront is that you feel like you're playing an arcade game. And it's kind of funny, the CFO of EA saying if there's any criticism, they just wanted more. I mean, that's a nice way of putting it. It's a nice way of saying that when I spent $60 for half of a game, basically, and I felt very ripped off that I had to pay another $40 or $50 to get these levels, which is going to finally, when Scarif comes out on the 5th, I think it was next Tuesday. Because I bought premium, and if you guys bought the premium, you'll get it, and then 2 weeks later you can buy it a la carte. Yeah, it's like this stuff should have all been free. So as a consumer, I take it but that's the way games are now. It's like even this Battlefield game I'm talking about, there's a $50 add-on to the game. But the original one, Battlefront, I mean, we're talking not a lot of maps, not a lot of interaction. It was kind of very blah. Right. And you have to, the funny thing is that it's not a game where it's like really fun to kind of play for a week and then put down, because all the really fun stuff for people that have been playing for like dozens and dozens and dozens of hours, unlocking things. And I've just kind of gotten to the point where I feel like I've gotten everything that I wanted out of that, or everything I guess not what I wanted, but everything I think honestly I'm going to get out of it. It's like the one that I mentioned this last time, is that I played the Death Star thing, and it was like, wasn't that great. And so I felt like I paid extra for these, and it's like all the stuff I paid extra for, I feel like I didn't get my money's worth. I will definitely be playing the Scarif thing because, I want to talk about it on the show, but it's like I've already kind of moved on from that game. So, I think November 2017, so, like a month before episode 8 comes out, is when I think they're shooting for this Battlefront sequel, which I guess it would be Battlefront 2 or however they're numbering it now. It's like, I'll probably buy it because I'm a sucker for Star Wars video games, and there is nothing out there. I mean, I think we didn't really ever talk about the fact that Uprising has been pulled from the App Store. It's no longer being updated. It was like, that was the one, for people who remember, it was kind of, they made a big deal about it being canon, but it was like a kind of a sandbox situation where it's like, oh, it's a sector of the universe cut off from everyone else, and everything happens. It's a post Return of the Jedi thing where it's like, oh, in this thing, the rebellion beating the Empire is a myth. I mean, they really built it up, and then it did not. It did. I think Galaxy of Heroes engaged people a lot more, but that's not my cup of tea. So I just want like some great Star Wars adventure, like an immersive kind of game, like something that I can't wait to go pick it up and take a spin on it. Something open world, that's a big thing now with games. It's like an open world Star Wars game would be so awesome. Something where it's like, you don't have to jump in every time and be in a battle. And maybe sometimes you run errands, you become a smuggler. It's almost like when they had Star Wars Galaxies, which I never ever had a PC that could play properly. Always seemed to be like that. But, something more like, gosh, this is a terrible example, but it's the only one on the tip of my brain right now. Like a Grand Theft Auto situation where you could just, maybe sometimes when you play Grand Theft Auto, you just drive around in cars all day and you visit stores or you collect loot. Just something that could have a little bit for everyone. And Battlefront is just one of these games where you're just in a battle. And the maps are very small, and they're they look great. The Cloud City, I think I told you, the Cloud City map looked fantastic, but you only get to, it's like you only really are getting a sliver of it. It feels very antiseptic. Like it's like you don't it's like you don't feel in it. And I kind of, and I don't get super deep into games, but Star Wars games are like one of those ones I'm always curious what's going, even if it's a mediocre Star Wars game. It's like I played, I've played through The Force Unleashed twice, and I didn't like that game.
Yeah.
Because I'm just hurting for some good Star Wars, console gaming. That's my thing. I don't play on PCs. I don't play on my phone. I just want to pick up my controller and get into it. But there's just not enough in Battlefront. And I don't blame them now in retrospect, because when I go back and I'm being honest about the Battlefront games that came out for the original Xbox and PlayStation 2, it's not terribly different than what they were doing 10 years ago. So it's not like it was a bait and switch. It was more of a situation than where they didn't push the goalpost forward and make more of an immersive, expansive experience. So I hope, I don't know, the CFO, he's a money guy. He's not he's not programming. I assume it's in Sweden, in Stockholm is where they're making this.
Right.
Hopefully they took the criticisms of this game and instead of kind of trying to attract everyone, maybe they make a more immersive experience.
Yeah. And I'm not someone who plays these video games anymore. I don't have the time or the technology to do it, but I just know from my own experience, I do want there to be good Star Wars games out there, and I think it's better for everyone. And in the Star Wars fandom, if there are good Star Wars games out there, when I was younger, I played X-Wing and TIE Fighter a lot, and Dark Forces a lot, and those were kind of how I interacted with it, in addition to reading the books and the movies and everything. But, it was great, and I enjoyed it, and they were fun. And so just because of that experience, I'm like, well, I kind of want there to be good Star Wars games so that other people can have fun playing Star Wars video games. And so, yeah, even though I'm not really involved at all in playing these or buying these or anything like that, you're reading about Battlefront and hearing you talk about it, I'm like, yeah, I really hope they fix these, because even though it's not going to affect me at all, like I think it's generally good if there are good Star Wars video games out there. So I hope they get it right.
Yeah, and I think that's it's when the games are the best, it's the idea where, it's a console seller. It's the thing where a person like you that's like, I don't really have time or the inclination. If a game's good enough, on some level, you're going to be like, oh, maybe I should look around and see if there's any deals, that kind of situation. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't, if you had said to me like, hey, I'm thinking about buying a console for this game, is it worth my, $300 to buy it? I would say no. I would say no.
Right.
It's not, you're not, it's
that's
not,
the other part of it, is the expense of it too. It adds to it.
Yeah. It's like, $300 for a console, $110 if you want the whole game. Plus, you're paying $50 for the right to play online now, because that's every console basically makes you pay a premium to use your console online. So, yeah, economically speaking, it's not a Battlefront is not a console seller. If you're on the fence about getting back into gaming, that would not be I think you would find it to be a very superficial experience and not get your, all told $450 worth. What are we looking at here? How much we want to do some comics, or do we want to do Rebels?
So either.
Let's do some comics, because I really like the Han Solo. So
so there are 3 comic books issues that came out over the last week or so. The Han Solo miniseries wrapped up. The Star Wars title wrapped up its Last Flight of the Harbinger storyline, and then just yesterday we got a new Star Wars annual number 2. So we'll start with Han Solo. So this is right again. Han Solo is in the cannonball run of space, where he's going. He's racing the Falcon against other people trying to win, but then he's also stopping at all these different planets to pick up rebel spies, one of whom is a traitor and has been killing all the others. So they have to figure that out. So this issue number 5, it's the very end of the race, where we left off in issue 4. One of these rebel spies had just been killed. I guess he was poisoned. I think last episode I said he was shot, but he was actually poisoned. And that was the very end of the issue. And so issue 5, they find that this, rebel spy had been killed. And so they have to solve that and then finish the race. So the race, they're at the finish line here. The Empire has again shown up and is trying to disrupt this race because it knows that there's some connection to the rebellion going on here. So it's trying to disrupt the end of this race. The finish line is some kind of, not ancient, but older manufactured wormhole that, the first ship that goes through it gets automatically brought to the starting line, and then everyone else just kind of gets stuck where they are. So Han's about to win, and he's been talking with Lou Rayano about, her and her people and her history, and she's the last of her kind and all that stuff. And so he kind of pulls up, he backtracks to let Lou Rayano win the race. And because Lou Rayano's, ancestors started this race, her grandmother helped found this race, they built the track, all of that kind of stuff. And so because she kind of won the race, she goes through the wormhole, she's able to come back with reinforcements to, fight off the Empire, pull everyone else through the wormhole together, all of the other racers. And so everyone ends up, surviving. With the assassin, they find out that the assassin is exactly who we thought it was. One of these rebel spies kept insisting that it wasn't him, which if you've seen any television show or movie with a similar scenario, that means they're usually probably the one who did it. Maybe not the movie Clue, but so the guy who's like, oh, it's not me, I'm not a killer, I'm nervous, who's killing all these people? It turned out it was him. And then the Feline bodyguard of the prince or whomever who got killed, the bodyguard was the best of the rebel spies, I guess. She's the one who had the master list of everyone, the one who really had the stuff worth protecting. And so that gets sorted out. Han delivers these rebel spies and the information to Princess Leia. And he, helped Lou Rayano win the race, and he stuck to his principles. And so he gets this kind of nice, warm feeling about that. And so then he and Leia at the end, they're chatting about, his decisions and what kind of a person he is and how he has these ethics and principles about him. And then at the very end, their pinky fingers just lightly touch. They lightly graze each other. Their hands are next to each other. They lightly graze pinkies, and that is supposed to be a signal that maybe they're growing closer together. And so that wraps up the Han Solo miniseries. So you said you really liked it.
Yeah, I mean,
I will say this issue, sorry, I know I'm interrupting you already, but
it's all right.
One thing I forgot to mention, this issue also has more of that kind of blurry effect that was in one of the earlier issues that I know you and I talked about as being kind of disorienting, where
that's not
they're showing like, it's like where you have the one thing in the foreground is in focus, and then everything else in the background is kind of blurry, I guess to show like the speed at which things are happening, and also to give the reader like a clear focus on the Falcon and everything. That came up a fair amount in this issue. But anyway, so you liked this issue. I know we both liked the miniseries, but you liked the way that this ended as well.
Yeah, I think it was satisfying. I mean, I don't think it really like changed things. I mean, I think it just reinforced this idea that, Han Solo once he got his prize and he makes that change, at the end of A New Hope, that he's like, I'm going to help these people out. That didn't necessarily mean he was going to sign up for the whole enchilada of the rebellion. He was just like, maybe I shouldn't have walked out on these people that seemed like pretty good after right at the cusp of this major battle. And so this kind of reemphasizes the idea like, hey, maybe he's obviously got Han Solo has a pretty good moral center. I mean, I don't think that's ever been a thing where it's like, there's always been this back and forth, like, oh, Han Solo, I hate the fact that George Lucas changed that he shot, for him from shooting first, because it showed that he was like this cold-blooded, killer, that his heart was warmed by helping the rebellion. And then Lucas, he would say, I didn't like the idea because it made him look like a cold-blooded killer. Whereas I think this kind of falls in the realm of the idea that, Han Solo was not a cold-blooded killer. Okay, people go, oh, he was a spice smuggler. It's like, no, he was a person that, he wasn't a drug dealer, but he'd ship around whatever. It's like there's like this old 90s or aughts action movie has this joke where it's like, if the money's there, we do not care. It's this captain of this ship, and that's kind of what I think of when I think of, you know, pre A New Hope Han Solo. It's like, you know, he's just making his way in the galaxy, and this kind of reemphasizes this idea that it's like, you know, he has a moral center. Like, he does the right thing. He lets this what it was, the characters, the Lurianos go back, because the whole caveat was, if you don't, only the first person that goes through the gate gets to get transported or something, and everyone else gets stuck waiting to somebody to come and get them, because it's something to do with the way fuel is used in that part of the galaxy. Fuel efficiency is so bad that you can get stranded out in the middle of nowhere.
Right. So that's right. I forgot about that.
And then the Empire is coming, is right on their tail. So it's that kind of thing where he actually, in some ways, he makes a greater sacrifice than he does going back to fight the Death Star, because he kind of, you know, he could have shown up and shot Darth Vader's ship, or the whatever. I'm not Darth Vader, but he could have shot that TIE fighter that hit Darth Vader, and then he could have just said, "All right, later, boom, I'm gone." You know, hyperspace. This guy, he literally was like, he had no fuel. He had, you know, there was no advantage to him doing that, but I think just something in his gut told him he needed to do it. And so he did it. So it kind of shows you that he does have a moral center about that. He is the Han Solo that we always thought he was going to be. And then in some respects, it's like, yeah, that kind of, I like the fact that, that it's not like this thing where they're like talking about their feelings at the end. And yeah, it's a very subtle thing with the touch of the hand, that kind of idea that, you know, they both know who they are. She's the princess and he's the smuggler who may or may not be sticking around. And as time goes on, we know he initially, his thing was he was going to leave.
Right.
I mean, and I liked it. It does.
Yeah. I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, it also kind of starts to repair this idea that this uncomfortable thing that exists in the original trilogy of this kind of weird sexual tension between Luke and Leia and Han, the triangle that obviously gets very, because we all know George didn't really know until almost Jedi was done what he was going to do. So, hence why there's all that unfortunate kissing. It kind of like reorientates it, and more of like, you can almost retcon that stuff into like, she's just trying to make him jealous kind of thing. And it makes it a much more chaste situation instead of like this uncomfortable, like, why is there incest in this movie? But that's idea that, you know, it's almost like, yeah, they immediately have an attraction to each other, but it's that kind of attraction where they don't like each other. And that, you know, that to me, in my mind, it's like, that is a very potent type of attraction that, like, I know I like this person and it pisses me off. You know, that's the kind of like, those are the most fun relationships, the ones that kind of start in a kind of, almost like people would think like, no, they'll never get together. They can't stand each other. Right. So
yeah, I mean, it does seem, you know, in this and in the Star Wars title, there seems to be this agreement to like just kind of ignore the Luke Leia stuff in the first two in, you know, A New Hope and Empire. Like, we're just kind of not going to address it and just really play up the Leia Han stuff.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's. I mean, and I had forgotten. You're right. I'd forgotten about that part of space. You know, at the finish line, it did something to their engines where they burned more fuel than usual, and so yeah. I mean, even that, I'm blanking on her name, but the Feline bodyguard. You know, she, as soon as he makes the decision to let Luriana win, she's like, all right, here's your gun. You might as well just shoot us because we are dead, right? Like that really was, it was a decision basically that, yeah, you know, we're just all going to die here, either because the Empire is going to capture us, or we're just going to be sitting here in space until our food runs out and everything else runs out and then we die, right? So yeah, I mean, it really was a very bold move, a very, strong choice in terms of, kind of revealing who he is as a character. But yeah, so I liked it a lot. I mean, the other thing I appreciated was that both this issue and the miniseries overall, it was just paced very well. Yeah, because we've talked about this with some of the other miniseries and some of the other ongoing series too, right? Some of the storylines they've done where it's like, okay, we know this storyline is coming to a close, and wow, they have a lot of ground to cover, and they have a lot of loose ends to tie up before they do it. And so, like with the Darth Vader thing, right? That those last couple issues, they would spend, pages and pages and pages on one of these loose ends, and then like 2 pages on, okay, well, what about, Silo, who is set up as like the main antagonist of this whole 25 issue thing? Okay, well, they just get rid of him in like 2 pages, and that's the end of it, or maybe if that, right? Maybe a page. Right. Whereas this one, it felt like each of those stories, the assassin plot and then the race itself kind of got the space that they needed. Right. The assassin plot is not right. That's kind of driving a lot of the drama, but it's not ultimately like the most important part of this story. That's not really what the core of the story is. It's about, as we've been talking about, it's about kind of Han and the choices he made as a racer, and Lou Rayano talking about like how that relates to who you are as a person and all that kind of thing. And so, yeah, they pretty much immediately solved the mystery of who the assassin was. It was dealt with very quickly. And then they got on with the race and let that drive the issue, because then, right, they could do all kinds of cool artwork of the race and of, everyone's reactions to things happening. And I thought it worked on a pacing level for me anyway, that kind of helped make sure that all the rest of it felt satisfying as well. So that was the other thing that I appreciated about this series generally, but then this issue and wrapping everything up as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the art too, but I don't like the blur thing, which I think is obviously their attempt to make it more cinematic, which I just don't think they need to do. It kind of ruins how I really like this art. It's good art. It's like I don't feel like I need the blurring of the things to actually feel. Yeah, I feel like it was an error. It's almost like I wish they would release a special. It's like, can you release a version of this that does? I mean, I'm hoping George doesn't, since he wanted to buy all this artwork supposedly, that like maybe he's like, hey, can you take the blur out of that, because it's awful. It's like you're making your art all this trouble you went to, unless it's he's trying to use the blur to cover up bad deals. I do also like this. There was also like a little touch of, which they didn't go too deep into, which I appreciate, this kind of like metaphysical transdimensional thing that happened. Where they brought out like this weird squid. I like that, because it's like, I kind of like it when Star Wars, like at least in the ancillary material, I wouldn't really want this in the movies, that sometimes like little conceits from science fiction, like tropes of like, transdimensional beings, and like when they kind of just skirt the edge of it, instead of it being like, we're gonna have to deal with like transdimensional warriors this season on Rebels. I mean, I don't want that kind of stuff, but I like the idea that like, not everything in the Star Wars galaxy is the Force and the rebellion. There's actually, there's like people that have had whole civilizations and existences that don't bear on the life and death of Han Solo or Princess Leia or Luke Skywalker or Vader. I mean, not that we should go off into those kind of things, but I just like the idea where it kind of reorientates, like, not everything is your Star Wars. It's like, they've always touched on that kind of thing, like the Journal of the Wills and and like I said, if they don't overdo it, it's a nice touch. There was one other thing. I guess I forgot to mention that too. That Lou Rayano summons this like trans-dimensional being to get everyone out of a scrape with the Empire, and it's
Yeah, it's so like, oh, this is a thing that happened, like this is what just happened, but without going into like, oh, I guess there are all of these trans-dimensional beings out there and you are somehow able to summon them. Like they don't ever stop to explain it, which I think is totally fine, right? Because they need
Right.
to keep the story moving, and in some ways it's kind of an out of like,
Yeah.
we're kind of in a corner here, we need to get, we need something to get us out of this mess, to take care of the Empire. Trans-dimensional jellyfish.
Yeah, I mean, I will admit that. Yeah, there is one way to view it where it's like, oh, come on, really? Are they going to come in the Deus Ex?
I think that was my
Machina?
initial. Yeah, that was my initial feeling about it, and then I was like, it's fine, whatever.
I would rather have them do that than to do like, and I keep thinking of this series, and wrongly so, probably because I thought it was a limited series as well. The Poe Dameron series was like, oh man, that thing is talky and boring, and I don't feel like I still don't. It's like I have seen The Force Awakens, I have seen Shattered Empire. I have read 6 copies of Poe Dameron. I have no idea who this guy is.
Right.
Like, I just don't have any sense of him. And it's like,
yeah.
And I know Oscar Isaac is a charismatic actor, so this is not a dig on him. I just feel like they do not know what to do with him. And maybe that's partly because originally he was supposed to die in the first 20 minutes of the movie. But, and now they've got this extra character, but it's like, it's a Han Solo thing goes and shows you really how it's like, how you work with what you have. And it's like you make decisions. And now that I realize that this Poe Dameron thing is not even a limited series, it's just supposed to be a thing. And it's like, they're like artificially slowing it down, and it's just like, oh geez, why didn't they do something 5, boom, boom, boom. Let me give me a good sense of Poe Dameron. I want to know, I want to like this guy. And you're not giving me any reason to. It's like, other than the fact, oh, he's a Star Wars character. And it's like, that's not enough with this ancillary material. I'm not going to, if they announced that, like, oh, Poe Dameron standalone book coming out right before episode 8 or something, it's like, I would have to get a pretty good review to be even remotely interested in reading, because they have not done much to push it forward something to make him interesting to me. And
I mean, the Poe Dameron comic, I'm also kind of unclear on what they're trying to do with it. I mean, it seems like it's just kind of fun adventures with Poe Dameron versus Agent Terex, as kind of the main recurring villain. And it's just kind of him flying around trying to get information, I guess, trying to track down Lor Santeca and all of the wild, wonderful aliens that he meets along the way, which is fine, but considering that it's not a very well defined character. I mean, all we really have is however much screen time Oscar Isaac had in The Force Awakens, at least right now. But it also doesn't seem like they're using the comic book to try to expand on that or try to build out some of who this character is. And in part they can't, because Oscar Isaac is still making these movies and they're kind of leaving it to him to do that, right? They want to give him the freedom, they meaning, I'm sure, like Lucasfilm,
right?
Want to make sure that they don't step on his toes and like contradict this character, and wherever Oscar Isaac decides to take it, whatever the episode 9 script, because I'm not even sure, is the episode 9 script written yet? Because Ryan,
they have
Ryan
to
Johnson's
have,
writing it, and he's been busy with episode 8.
They have to have like at least a good story.
They have an outline, I'm sure.
Right. I mean, they're probably already building sets and stuff like that.
But they can't really use the comic book to kind of expand on this character and really figure out who Poe Dameron is, because that's already also happening at the same time in the movies. So it just means that we're not really developing this character anymore. He's just a guy who still calls his droids pal and buddy and whatever, and he's a good pilot. So it's just kind of this like, I mean, it does feel, I guess you could say, depending on how you look at it, and maybe this is a generous interpretation, but it is maybe a little reminiscent of those old serials that, inspired George Lucas to make Star Wars in the first place, with Flash Gordon or, Rocky Jones, Space Ranger, or whatever that one was called, where it's just kind of this guy flying around in space having adventures. And that's fine, but a lot of those serials were not good or interesting, right? They're kind of boring.
Oh, I know. I mean,
to look back at them.
I definitely,
and especially if you're not doing anything to develop the character, then they're even less interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Star Wars first came out, and everybody'd say, "Oh, Buster Crabbe in playing Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers," which I think he played both.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, if you love Star Wars, you're gonna love these things. And I went and spent the Saturday watching them on TV. I hated them. I just
I never got into them either.
It was just like they looked bad. They had no, it was like Star Wars was so self-contained as a thing. It's kind of funny though when something, it's like, well, you can. I don't know. This is the problem when you have like, oh, everything is connected in one continuum, where I feel like it's like it was much better off when you could just kind of go like, all right, this isn't really like the writer has some freedom to like maybe expand something that Oscar Isaac is just gonna completely wipe away with his performance. It's like they're two different versions of the character, it's like I don't believe that, Harrison Ford, like people like in 1978 or 79 when they were doing the Star Wars comics, that they go, when people were writing, Archie Goodwin or whatever was going, oh geez, I hope Harrison Ford doesn't do anything to screw this up for me in my characterization in the next movie. It's like they were kind of viewed as like, well, let's try to get the character to look as much like the actor as possible, but if we need to do something for the sake of a story, let's do it. And it's like, I feel like that Poe Dameron is like, well, they're just in a holding pattern all the time. And, there wasn't I don't even know, was there a Poe Dameron this week? Cause I just didn't see it in the
No, there hasn't been one.
We're just picking on him, picking on Poe.
Right. Well, I mean, it is contrast to this Han Solo one. And one is a limited 5-issue miniseries. The other is an ongoing thing. So, what you're able to do in those formats is different, but it is, I mean, Han Solo, I would say even up against the Darth Vader title and, the ongoing Star Wars title, like of all of the Star Wars comics that we've gotten in, now that Marvel, now that Marvel is putting them out again in this new second Marvel era, like I think Han Solo is probably the best title that they've done.
Yeah.
Just, even taking everything into account, the length of it, characters, everything are, for what it is trying to do, for what its goal is, for what it is, this is probably the best comic that they put out, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's my opinion anyway.
I mean, at least like Vader, I had ups, and I haven't gone. I definitely don't go back.
Vader, I would say we both thought was kind of inconsistent.
Yes, I guess in one word that would say inconsistent. So yeah, I mean, it's like these limited series, and there's so many series, so they're kind of, I mean, they're almost trying to create a line, whereas some of these, they could have dined for 2 years or 3 years off of just a couple of these stories in a single title, but now everybody has to have their own, one-off series. But this is, I think, I would say if we're talking about limited series, definitely this would be my favorite. Second Lando, and then everything else. I'd say Vader is probably third, but only because of the inconsistencies over a 25-issue run.
Yeah, I liked Shattered Empire more than you did, so I would probably put it up there with Lando or Darth Vader, but I also see why some people might have looked at it as like, what is this? But I liked it. But yeah, I think it's Han Solo and then some order of Darth Vader, Lando, and Shattered Empire.
So do we want to save Star Wars 25 in the annual for another episode, or do we want to...
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Why don't we do that?
Yeah, we're about 2 hours now.
Yep.
We've probably numbed everybody's ears with all of our hot takes.
Hot takes.
So if our takes were just too hot and you gotta like tell us to cool them down, you know how to get a hold of us. It's hosts. That's host with an S at the end at talkingbirdcast.com. We're also on Twitter at talkingbirdcast.com. We have a website. It's www.talkingbirdcast.com. We also have an Amazon affiliate link, and I know people have been using it because I get the reports, and I do appreciate it. That people are making the effort, because sometimes it's like you have to think it's like, oh, I got to do this URL to go to Amazon, but I know people are doing it, and it really does help us offset the costs of hosting the show. And it is, if you haven't heard of it, it's www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. And how it works, it's just a thing you go through, and it takes you right to Amazon. And when you make a purchase, a qualifying purchase, whatever they've deemed qualifying, it kicks back a certain percentage back to the hosts or whatever is us, at no additional cost to you. That's the point I wanted to make. It doesn't cost you anything extra. Amazon pays us, but it just goes to show that you're paying attention to the show, and I always appreciate it. Did you have anything to add, John?
No. Just hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week on the podcast.
What's the name of the podcast, John? What's the name of the podcast? It's
on Talking Bird, the special edition.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.
Go along with this, but don't worry, you won't get hurt. Your equipment should protect you.
Being on the same team as you is all the padding I need, Rosie.
Are you okay?
You okay, Hoser?
I'm your father, Luke. Give in to the dark side of the Force, you knob.
He saw Jedi 17 times, eh? Beauty.